Hello, our Superstonk, and thank you for joining your host, Dismal Jellyfish and Luma, as we kick off our first NFT roundtable. It's amazing, not even 5 months ago, back in July, I was petitioning the mods that Ethereum should not be a banned word in the sub. NFTs were also viewed extremely skeptically as well, yet, as a testament to apes and their willingness to learn and go where data leads, here we are with three subject matter experts in NFTs ready to rumble. NFTs evolved into a matter of more importance for GME stockholders, from a hotly anticipated and much speculated about NFT marketplace to rumors of crypto dividends being a potential squeeze catalyst for MOAS. To our guests, thank you so much again for taking time out of your busy schedules and lives to sit down and chat with us. It is truly appreciated. In the materials I forwarded you ahead of time, I hope you could see that we GME apes are passionate, but still learning bunch of tree swinging apes. While we scream we are too smooth brained to comprehend and have an unusual interest in rectal bets, this is a tenacious and unyielding group when something has its attention. I hope you take away that GME apes very much believe in WAGME, and we are working to exemplify this everywhere we can. Shout out to Butt Farm 69 and the very merry holidays for Toys for Tots. However, with the introduction of NFTs and nft.gamestop.com, I see our circles on a crash course, and this is a good way, with the resulting Venn diagram from Impact a stronger and more well-informed community overall. A couple of housekeeping notes. Luma will be acting as the voice of Karam, who responded to questions posted in writing. Structurally, the vision is that the roundtable will loosely follow three categories: NFTs, their financialization, and technology. This is meant to be conversational with some interplay and follow-ups, and a looser format which will hopefully generate discussion. One area of focus that Luma and I really dug into in this whole concept of left brain, which is organization, logic, math, and structure, and right brain, art, creativity, design, spontaneity, is involvement in NFT creation, and that requires a balance between two really different thought processes. As a sort of philosophical point of order, if you will, this is intended to be high level, reflecting the status of your guests. The more blocking and tackle sort of questions will be managed in the comment section of the thread by myself and other mods. Really hoping to be able to use our time together as productively as possible. With that introduction, let's meet our guests and dive into some questions. First, we have Owen, aka Oaksman. When it comes to our topics, Owen is a triple threat. They create NFTs, on-chain AI-generated monster NFTs. They work to financialize NFTs and are helping to develop the system NFTs transact on. Owen, I don't know if you want to say hello real quick before I move on to Gauss and Karam.
Yeah, hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Super excited to have you here. If everybody would, refer to the NFT roundtable post, you'd see we've got more of a background on Owen here. His work with SudoSwap, what he's been doing with generalized asset bundles. And I didn't necessarily mention it on the thread here, but he's also done a lot of work in the VRF front, which is going to be really big, I think, when it comes to gaming and making sure that items that are won fairly, transparently, and folks are able to go back and take a look at that. I think he'd be able to kind of give us some insight on the gaming front. And then I know we all have a whole bunch of questions around how ZK rollups are going to work. He's done a bunch of work on that front with ZK NFT. So I think he's the perfect guest to kind of give us some insight on that front as well. With us as well is Gauss, aka King Kai Dev. I hope, Gauss, that I'm saying that correct. I know you had that Twitter poll posted on how to say your name correctly, so I don't know what ultimately won. If I'm saying it incorrectly, please let me know and I'll go to the winner. But quickly about him, he is the founder of the decentralized NFT marketplace NFTX, or Niftix. Niftix is a platform for creating liquid markets for supposedly illiquid NFTs. Gauss, I don't know if you want to say hello before I continue going on here.
Yeah, I'll say hello. It's nice to be here. I'm actually in London at the moment. I'm meeting up with the NFTX team for the first time, and I apologize because there's probably a lot of background noise, and I might have to leave in about 15 minutes. We're going to see Hamilton, but it's been a crazy year, and I'm happy to offer any insight I can.
Oh, that's amazing. And for folks to know, Gauss was brave enough to forward me his Reddit username. So we've approved him for Superstonk. So I imagine that he will start getting some pings on NFT type questions moving forward. Owen, I won't throw that at you, but if that's something you want to, throw yourself into the wolves, if you will, we're certainly willing to allow you to speak with us on that front as well. Lastly, we have Karam, aka Karam Design. Luma, I don't know if you want to go ahead and read Karam's bio for us here real quick before we go ahead and get started further.
So Karam, aka Karam Design, is a French graphic designer and a creator of art. He's offered perspective on how art transfers to this medium, what an artist should be looking for in a smart contract, differences of one pieces versus collections, and other really interesting things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Knowing that Gauss potentially has a time limit here, I think I'd like to prioritize the questions towards him on the technology and financialization front first, which I think would probably have more of an impact to Owen and Gauss, because I think, Owen, some of these might be of interest to you as well. Karam, if you're willing to just hang around, I'll certainly get back more to the creative front as we go to wrap up here, if everybody's okay with that. So I think the first question I would love to kind of jump into, and this kind of comes from Zach's Muffin as well, from the questions from the thread. Can either of you, Gauss and Owen, offer any insights on how projects will convert to layer 2 in mass? Like, what sorts of cross-chain solutions and bridging do you see occurring to onboard projects from layer 1 now?
So yeah, it's I don't understand the technical side of L2 super well, but I do think that it's inevitable that a lot of trading ends up on layer 2. And I think it's more of a bootstrapping problem than a technical problem at this point. So there are a lot of L2 solutions coming out, and there's also like L1 EVM chains that are just faster and more gas efficient. But the problem is you still have to attract basically a critical mass of traders and assets for it to really take off. And I don't think we've quite seen that yet, but I think it's coming really soon. And with, all this increased attention to NFTs and also with the increased gas prices, it just feels inevitable that over the next 6 months or so that some L2 solution is going to really take off. And I'm personally really looking forward to that. And, NFTX, we're planning on deploying on other L2s. And yeah, I think that's the future of the space for sure.
Yeah, I think Alex is pretty nail on the head. I think the only thing I'd add is it's, I think, a little difficult for projects that might have already launched an L1 to necessarily migrate. But I'm pretty hopeful that a lot of the upcoming L2, fiat on-ramps with centralized exchanges will make it easy for people to not have to go through L1 costs at all. So I think, if you're sort of looking forward, you might expect to see projects that sort of launch directly, probably on like Starknet or ZK Sync in the coming months. And then a lot of the economic activity just sort of happening natively there, as Gauss says.
Owen and Gauss, I absolutely agree for future projects that they'll probably just live on L2, and the average person probably won't have the reason to go back to an L1. But for projects that exist on an L1 now, for marketplaces that are getting ready to potentially launch, is there some sort of mechanics at play here where you could see some sort of offering? Like, I guess I have OpenSea in mind. I imagine they don't want to lose all of the NFTs that they have listed there now to Coinbase or to GameStop or to anybody else that would be getting ready to launch an NFT marketplace. Do you see them offering some sort of economic incentive to those first projects to pay the freight to get them on their L2 to potentially stick there? Or is this going to be something where individual holders of projects really are going to have to try to make the best economic decision for themselves, or just potentially just stick with L1 altogether?
So I think there's a few things to unpack there.
Yeah, sorry, that's a question.
I think the first thing is that, there's going to be probably at least several different L2s, maybe even when we just talk about ZK rollups. But I don't think Coinbase, for example, is planning on launching their own network. So I guess the question that you posed about sort of OpenSea potentially losing their listings, I think I'm not quite sure what you mean by that in conjunction with your point about migrating.
I guess my point is right now, OpenSea gets a percentage of revenue from sales that occur on their platform. If Coinbase or somebody else were to make a better offer to say, hey, no longer list your NFTs on OpenSea, how does that play into potentially the economics of trying to get NFTs onto a layer two? And could potential airdrops be at play as a mechanism to get folks to go with one solution over another here as a new economic incentive to bring the NFTs or bring the content, if you will?
Got it, got it. So one thing to point out is that at least for many of these NFT marketplace contracts, you can actually have your item listed across multiple of them. Most of these contracts are non-custodial, so they don't, take ownership of your NFT while your order is up. So there's no issue in many cases, like listing across multiple places.
Okay.
And there actually have been a few NFT marketplaces that have done a little bit of what you described, where they will offer like token incentive of some sort if you like sell or transact through their platform. Like Rarible is, probably one of the most high-profile ones in recent years. Gotcha.
It looks like Alex might have to bounce here in a couple minutes. I don't know if he wants to try to take this answer, and I imagine he might have some perspective from how they're trying to lure NFTs to their layer two solutions over at Nyftix.
So yeah, I do think one term for that could be like a vampire attack. And we have seen that in the past in DeFi, like how SushiSwap kind of did this vampire attack on Uniswap, and they used token incentives to get people to move their trading over to their own platform. And then, like Owen says, it's not exactly that simple with NFTs because you can have your asset listed on multiple marketplaces. But yeah, I do think this will be a narrative going into the new year. And, from our own perspective, NFTX, right now, most of the stuff we're doing is around liquidity and automated trading. But we are planning to move more towards direct competition with OpenSea. And I think when that happens, we will be trying to suck as much volume from OpenSea as we can. And one way we are hoping to do that is by using token incentives. So basically like rewarding people for doing their trading on NFTX. So yeah, it's still so early that it hasn't really started happening yet. But I do expect that will be a pretty common narrative. And yeah, I have to go to see Hamilton now. So I'm really sorry I can't stick around longer, guys. Hopefully Owen can offer perspective on everything.
Appreciate your time and being able to join us for what you could, Gauss. And I'm sure we'll be looking to follow up with you in the comments when you get back and are settled from London. I hope you enjoyed the show. Owen, I don't know if this would be directly applicable to you because I was really kind of hoping to get Gauss's perspective with the NFTX Vault on this, but I understand that you helped them originally kind of getting off the ground, so I think you may be able to offer some unique perspective on this. A big interest of ours, of the GME Ape community when it comes to NFTs and potentially nft.gamestop.com is the ability to use used games as the NFT, if you will, so that you can have that frictionless, hey, I'm done with this game. I'd like to put it on the marketplace, get some sort of credit for it so that I can go on to my next adventure. Do you see that as an application for gaming NFTs moving forward? And then for something like Nyftix, would that be something in the background that could offer folks opportunities to liquidity for their NFTs after they finish a game? And I know I keep asking you multiple questions at once, but when it comes to tracking your progress and any items you win in the game, would that be where something like your generalized asset bundle could come into play to have the individual that's essentially bought the title, but that is still able to keep separate what they do within the world of the game?
Whew, okay, a lot of things.
Sorry.
I'll try to tackle them one at a time. So I think the first thing about NFTs and games, I think that while a lot of the blockchain and NFT tech is really exciting, I think one of the weak points is translating it into physical goods. So I don't, at least in the short term, see a lot of necessary benefit in having, just like eBay, but on chain where you're selling actual used game cartridges. I could imagine this being a little bit more feasible if you were selling, like the digital equivalent of a Steam key. But I think that content gating with regards to NFTs, like having an easy way for developers to allow someone to play a game if, they own some NFTs, still pretty nascent. So I think that, we'll need better development on that front before we can even start talking about secondary or retail markets based on top of this. And then more for the second point about what in-game assets might look like or achievements if they're tracked as NFTs, I'm of the opinion that a lot of the base tech that we see, whether that's what Loopring might be doing, or like I guess what like X Loopring might be doing with NFTs at GameStop, or what NFTs look like on ZK Sync, I think we'll probably need to see much more specialized software with regards to actual game integration. So I think that a lot of times what I suspect will happen is, you might have some on-chain record, but a lot of the actual logic for transferring or something is still happening within like the game servers, and then just occasionally, you're sending updates to the chain.
So would the updates to the chain be more like your leaderboard, making sure that you've got an immutable record of what's happened within the game servers so that everybody could agree what's what within that regard as the rest of the infrastructure is built out?
So maybe not exactly. I think what I have in mind, if you're familiar with Axie's Infinity, is sort of what they did with their Ronin sidechain, where I imagine that, the NFTs might have some ability to live on like a more neutral base layer, whether that's like ZK Sync or Immutable X. But then, when you're actually transferring, probably within the game, you have them in just like stored in like something similar to a centralized exchange, or like, the game servers, which makes transfers easier. And then you just have the option to potentially transfer them out if you want to, sell them on a separate marketplace that's not what the game is using.
Interesting. But in your mind, you'd be able to potentially separate if the gaming does end up more like a Steam key angle, not necessarily the cartridge angle. I take your point on that. But if it's a digital license, let's say, to access that world, you're of the opinion that if there is a secondary market for that and somebody buys a title for that, you'd be able to separate what you earn character-wise from that. The NFTs you earned in that used game are going to go with you. Somebody else is going to be able to come in and take that from you by playing that game, for instance, right?
Yeah, that's just an engineering problem, which is, I guess, easier in some ways.
Neat. No, I appreciate you kind of taking a step back and kind of walking through how the mechanics of some of this stuff can work, because I do think that we're all fascinated how the gaming aspect of this is going to end up playing out, and this is just unique insight that you have for us here. We brought Gauss back here to answer some additional questions because he's got some additional time for us, and with that, let's go ahead and get into that. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Oh, can't complain. Thank you again so much for taking the time to find some more time to come back and talk with us here.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I guess we'll dive right back into it here. One of the first questions I really kind of want to get your thoughts in is, how have limitations and features of different platforms influenced your work at NFTX? Is it NFTX or NFTX? Do you guys have a preference for how that's set
It's
up?
NFTX. Yeah, just
NFTX?
NFTX.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How is the market as a whole influenced your guys' work in the direction you guys are working to take with NFTX and your decentralized NFT marketplace?
Mm-hmm. So, like about a year ago or so, when I started building NFTX, a bit longer now, everything was really happening on Ethereum, and I kind of consider myself like a quote unquote Etherean. That's like where most of my interest was the past few years. So when we launched NFTX, it was all about Ethereum, and like I put in a light paper that we will probably continue to focus on Ethereum as like the backbone, but that we're very open to looking at other ecosystems and chains. So yeah, so far, we haven't actually been influenced that much by, I guess, the expanding space. We're still based on Ethereum, but like with gas prices going so crazy, I do think that 2022 we'll see a lot more expansion and diversification of kind of the chains and the ecosystems that NFTX operates on.
I think you're kind of leading into where I want to go with our next question here, and I think you've kind of hinted at this on Twitter a little bit. Can you offer any insights as to how projects will convert to layer 2 in mass? I mean, I know you've got the vaults that have a whole bunch of NFTs that are sitting on layer 1 now, and I think you've got some thoughts on how to get those to L2. I have to imagine that this is one of the what's that, the $64,000 question if we're going back in
Yeah.
time here.
Yeah.
How is everybody in your mind or your perspective going to migrate to L2 in a gas efficient manner, or is that something that might not even be possible?
Yeah, so I should say right off the bat that I'm definitely not an expert in the technicalities of like L1, L2. Most of my background is more of like a Solidity app developer. But yeah, I definitely have thoughts on all this. And it's definitely, a big point of concern and interest at NFTX. I think that it's largely like a bootstrapping problem. And it's not the sort of problem that can be solved directly through engineering means. There's a lot of timing that comes into it. And I think the last year, we've seen gas prices go up so much, but a lot of the big collectors and a lot of the big users, they've also made so much money in the last 12 months that they're still willing to cough up like $100, $200 to like just buy an NFT or sell an NFT or something. So yeah, we're not, we haven't really hit that point yet where there's enough of a push for people to go to L2s. And I think as long as, L2s don't have aren't attracting these big users, then it's harder for them to also attract the smaller users. So yeah, I think it's a lot about timing, and that different projects, there are mechanisms you can do like airdropping and stuff, and I think we might get into that in a bit. But yeah, it's largely like just a matter of timing. And I think, yeah, we're approaching that point where in 2022, we'll definitely see more big users and, the ultra rich start using L2s. And once that happens, I think the smaller users will probably follow.
I completely take your point, and I want to restate that for folks here that are very upset about high gas prices now as their first trying to dabble with their first NFTs. Like, gas wouldn't be this high if transactions weren't occurring, and it means that it's economical for somebody to make this transaction right now. It might not be for you at this moment for what you're trying to do, but for somebody else, that equation has been met and they're making this transaction, and that just goes to show the overall health of Ethereum, that we're seeing these high prices because there's demand to use the system. Would you kind of agree with that 10,000 foot view?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And like when I deployed NFTX last December, it cost me like I think it was like $50,000 to set up all the contracts and deploy them, and just in gas. And it was, largely because NFTs are very gas inefficient. You have to do like specific integers for each individual NFT. But now today that would probably be in the hundreds of thousands. Uh, Personally, yeah, I see it as like a healthy thing, even though it sucks. If I'm willing to spend 50 grand out of my mom's basement, I expect that big companies are going to be willing to spend $5 million to deploy. And I think any blockchain that eventually gets lots of demand is going to end up seeing high fees, just like how any big city, ends up seeing really big real estate costs, and ultimately you have to scale vertically, and that means L2s, and then the bottom layer just becomes more of like a settlement layer or like a place for the L2s to checkpoint. So yeah, gas, it's complicated and definitely a love-hate relationship with it.
What sorts of cross-chain solutions or bridging do you see occurring, on projects to make this happen? Or do you think it's going to be a hodgepodge of all of that? Or is there going to be something that you see coming out of the gate here that's going to catch everybody's eye as an L2 moving forward?
Yeah, it's hard to say, and I think I'm definitely part of the problem in the sense that I'm one of these users that has been very fortunate the last year and made a lot off my early investments. Um, so I just kind of pay the gas, and I don't really even dabble that much in L2s myself or other chains. Whereas like other team members on NFTX, there's lots of them that play around on Avalanche, Binance, Polygon. And mostly I just kind of hang out on Ethereum and hit, high priority gas, just pay extra to get it go through faster. But yeah, even for myself, it's becoming an issue. And I know that there are lots of different bridging mechanisms. I think at the end of the day, it's all really trade-offs. Like there's no perfect solution, and that bridges that are faster are going to tend to be less decentralized and less
Hmm.
secure, but that ultimately there will be like a middle ground that's found, and like certain chains will hit certain niches. So for people that don't need lots of security, it's like, well, then you go to a cheaper environment with a cheaper bridge. If you want medium security, maybe you use this other chain or this other ecosystem. um, so yeah, it's really hard to say now. At NFTX, we're just trying to stay as open as possible. And the nice thing is that with Solidity, as long as these other chains are EVM compatible, it's really easy for us to deploy. The hard part is that there's often a lot of other little pieces that you don't realize. So like we've been working on deploying on Palm, which is kind of like an Ethereum L2,
Hmm.
cheap gas. And
That's
it's
what the
just
one
taken.
that DC Comics went forward with, right? For their
Yeah,
L2.
yeah.
Yep. Just for the
And
background for our listeners. That's all. I'm sorry.
yeah, no, and it's like it'll be the first one that, the first L2 that we actually deploy on, but it's just been taking a lot longer than we expected. And it's little things that you don't think of. Like for instance, there's no Etherscan for Palm yet, and they do have a block explorer, but their block explorer doesn't support proxy contracts yet. And
Mm.
it's just like this little thing. And I think, it's often you don't realize how many little things go into supporting an ecosystem until you actually start trying to build on it. Uh, but yeah, it's still early, and like gas has shot up the last year. So I think, a lot of teams are working really hard to play catch up, and that it'll get increasingly easy for us to just, deploy on Polygon, deploy on Palm, deploy on Avalanche, et cetera, et cetera.
Gotcha. Do you have any visions that are currently limited by available technology, or what technology advances would be required to bring what you're limited to fruition right now?
hmm Um, I would say that we're not limited specifically, but that the demographic of users and the scope of the use cases are limited. So, like, if you're paying $200 to do something on NFTX because of gas prices, then chances are you're only going to do that if the NFTs you're trading are worth at least a few $1,000s, right? Like, it's unlikely someone's going to pay $200 in gas to buy $100 NFT. So, yeah, like we're kind of just focusing on expensive NFTs right now because those are the ones that people are willing to pay the gas for. But that in itself is very limiting, and it's unfortunate, for friends and family that want to try out NFTX and they're like, oh, holy crap, it's going to be like $200 for me to do this. And yeah, that just again, I think that will change. And I know a lot of people say that with L2s, you can also get into more complex contracts. Um, and that's, just in itself kind of a limiting factor for developers. When I was building NFTX, one of the biggest problems for me was managing to get the contract under 24 kilobytes, because
Hmm.
that's the maximum contract size in Ethereum. So it's just like little things like that. You really can't do complex operations because it just starts adding up gas so quickly. So a lot of people do expect we'll see sort of like a Cambrian explosion of applications and unexplored use cases as L2s do start attracting mainstream usage. But that, it's an unexplored area, so people don't really know what sort of use cases will emerge. But that's exciting.
Gotcha. And everything that you are, pursuing at this point has to be built, right? There is nothing that you could just readily
hmm
go grab and start with. Just going back to your Etherscan example, in terms of just using Palm, I imagine in terms of any other, you know, L2 that you go to move to, there'd be varying levels of maturity of things you would have to either compensate for by having your team build out or working with the broader community to bring the experience to everybody, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like that, you know, with like ecosystems and nature and cities, is that there's a lot of little pieces that you don't think about. Like you need a police department, fire department, you know, all these municipality to actually then have a foundation that you can grow from. And it just takes time. Um, and yeah, I think we're getting pretty close.